Most people believe that power corrupts character, but they're wrong. Power's more insidious effect is that it corrupts the feedback surrounding you. It changes what people are willing to say and what information is allowed to reach you. I once heard that a king sleeps with one eye open. Assassins may lurk around every corner, but the greater threat has always come from the people standing beside the throne. Once someone needs something from you, their loyalty can no longer be taken at face value. The person praising you may want access. The employee agreeing with you may be protecting their position. The board member reassuring you may have learned that your approval is worth more than the truth. In my last video, I mapped the loneliness of the summit. Today, I'm going to dissect the mechanism that builds the glass wall around it. I call this the transactional tax of power. Here's the core problem. The higher your status rises, the harder it becomes to verify whether a relationship is genuine. Success multiplies the number of reasons someone might have to appear loyal. Money, reputation, access, and proximity can become contaminants. Each interaction has the possibility to turn into a transaction that you cannot confirm as genuine. Research on power and perspective taking offer one part of the explanation. The higher someone climbs, the more their brain inhibits the ability to read other people's true motives. At the peak, the stakes of misreading are the highest, but the larger problem is structural. Once your position changes, you are no longer receiving information from a neutral environment. The data that reaches you has already passed through a series of filters like fear, ambition, admiration, resentment, and even self-preservation. Each filter removes something, which in turn distorts the truth. That is where the glass walls start forming. Power can corrupt character. We have all heard statements like, "He was nicer before," or "the power went straight to her head." But the more imminent danger is that power corrupts the feedback loop required to notice those changes. You cannot correct what you cannot see. And at a certain altitude, very few people are willing to show you your own reflection. To understand this, we have to look at what changes between equal status relationships and power asymmetric ones. When you hold no power over someone, they respond to you directly. They feel comfortable disagreeing with you without calculating the consequences. But as your status increases, your words carry more weight, your approval becomes more valuable, and your disappointment becomes more expensive. People begin to filter themselves before they speak. They might remove the criticism that creates friction, or they replace the uncomfortable answer with the answer they believe you want to hear. So when you ask a question, the person across from you is no longer asking themselves, "What is the truth?" They're asking themselves, "What keeps me safe?" This is the first payment of the transactional tax. The person may not be consciously plotting against you. They might not even consider themselves to be dishonest. The person is simply adapting to the new risk structure that has formed around you. Regardless, the result remains the same. You get a carefully edited version of reality. This is why success produces visibility, but not genuine loyalty. Visibility produces incentives. Incentives distort relationships. And once relationships are distorted, isolation becomes structural, which makes it even harder to distinguish truth from usefulness. Not everyone around you will become malicious, but many may become strategically agreeable, and the difference may not always be easy to detect from the throne. But the transactional tax only describes half of the distortion. The second tax that compounds the first is the visibility tax. As your influence increases, ordinary behavior begins to carry more weight. Your silence is interpreted and your facial expression is analyzed. A delayed response becomes a message, while a minor criticism becomes evidence of changing allegiance. You are no longer simply existing in front of other people. You are now being observed by people who have a stake in reading you correctly. And that observation changes behavior on both sides. You start to manage perception instead of just communicating. You are not just making decisions anymore, but you're also micromonitoring the reactions to those decisions. This results in chronic self-monitoring on both sides of the relationship, and a normal conversation starts to feel more like an intelligence briefing. This is what makes high-status relationships exhausting. People no longer just want something from you. You even begin to question if people would want to know you if you had nothing to offer. Desher Keltner and his colleagues have spent decades studying what happens to social perception when power enters the room. Contrary to popular belief, powerful people are not incapable of empathy. Rather, power can reduce the ability to accurately interpret other people. According to Keltner and his colleagues, studies in which participants judge actual social actors lend support to the prediction that high-power individuals are less accurate social judges. In the negotiation literature, high-powered disputants tend to be less aware of the opponent's underlying interests. When you carry more weight, people tend to adjust themselves around you. You receive fewer natural corrections. In turn, you become less practiced at detecting resistance or concealed disagreement. The person with the highest authority may hold the least accurate understanding of what people actually think. If that loss of perspective occurs around the same time that other people become more cautious around you, the two problems reinforce each other. You become less sensitive to dissent, and they become less willing to express it. So, you think of the resulting silence as agreement, while they interpret your confidence as a reason to remain silent. The system then rewards you for being certain, even when certainty is beginning to replace accuracy. That is the cost of being too right too often. When a leader makes several correct decisions in succession, people assume that the leader is right even before the leader starts speaking. That sounds flattering, but it's not. The room no longer evaluates the idea because it shifted to evaluating the person who produced it. And that's a psychological hazard that has career-ending consequences. Researchers Park, Westphal, and Stern examined what happens when high-status CEOs become the target of sustained flattery and opinion conformity from their colleagues. Their findings revealed a pattern they called the Icarus paradox. CEOs who received high level of ingratiation became measurably more overconfident in their strategic judgment. That overconfidence reduced their willingness to change strategy even when their company was underperforming. And the strategic persistence, which came from years of received sanitized feedback, ultimately increased the likelihood of their dismissal. The same mechanism that makes someone feel powerful, so admiration and absence of friction, is the mechanism that accelerates their downfall. I covered this in one of my other videos. The pedestal you allow other people to build for you is not your throne. It will ultimately become your execution scaffold. This bleeds into decision quality problem. The Icarus paradox is not a cautionary tale of pride. When feedback is filtered, the leader loses access to early warnings. Strategic threats are recognized later, hence internal weaknesses stay hidden longer. People wait until a problem becomes impossible to ignore before they bring it forward, and by then the cost of correction has compounded. The delay then moves from being personal to flowing through the organization. Capital is allocated to strategies that no longer work, and succession plans are built around loyalty rather than competence. People move up the ladder because they never challenged the leader, not because they were right. This is how an echo chamber does more than flatter a person. It damages capital allocation and succession planning, which impacts the long-term enterprise value. But we have seen that many leaders remain at their posts long after the quality of their judgment declines. The organization does not fire them because it keeps repeating the story of their earlier competence. The leader's reputation becomes a protective layer around their decisions. People remember what the leader used to be capable of, and they interpret current failures as temporary exceptions. Meanwhile, the inner circle of the leader becomes a palace guard. Its function changes from advising the leader to controlling which version of reality the leader is allowed to see. The longer a leader stays insulated, the harder it becomes for anyone inside the system to challenge the insulation itself. This brings us to the people who benefit the most from contaminated feedback. When most people hear sycophancy, they think glorified praise. So someone agrees too quickly and treats every sentence from the leader as wisdom. That type of person is easy to identify, but there are more dangerous versions that are subtle. Strategic flattery can look like honeyed words, but sometimes it looks like understanding, other times it may look like shared values. As I mentioned earlier, success changes people's risk calculations. They weigh the cost of disappointing you against the benefit of telling you the truth. That doesn't mean they necessarily lie to you, rather, their words are selective. There are 3 types of sycophants you will encounter, and each trades you a different form of false loyalty. The first is the reflector. They mirror your preferred image of yourself. For example, if you see yourself as unusually perceptive, they emphasize how few people can understand what you see. Their strategy is to reinforce the identity you have constructed without challenging it. As power rises, psychological mirrors disappear, which is why you need someone willing to tell you where your exceptionalism has turned into a liability. The second type is the insulator. They control what reaches you and how it reaches you. They look indispensable because they're always protecting your time. In reality, the protection is actually filtration. So you become information rich but reality poor. The installator might not want to harm you, as their goal might be to just filter out unnecessary noise, but in doing so, they decide what is unnecessary noise instead of letting you decide. The third is the usurper. They use proximity to accumulate authority. Their strategy is to become indispensable by positioning themselves between you and everyone else. They know what you know, who you trust, which information you're unlikely to question, etc. Their goal is to create an impression that they understand you completely. Now, usurpers can begin as advisors, assistants, partners, or even trusted confidants. However, over time, they become the unofficial owners of the relationship between you and your organization, and they are completely indifferent to your well-being. The solution to this is not to distrust everyone, as that would only replace your echo chamber with paranoia. Instead, you should audit the relationships around you with these 4 tests. The first is the friction test. Who disagrees with you when you're wrong, and how often? A single objection proves little. Anyone can flatter once, but it takes conviction to keep creating friction. So watch for repetition, but keep in mind that some people weaponize disagreement to establish their own importance. If that happens, then ask, can they give you clear reasons for their disagreement, and do those disagreements hold up over time? When someone lies, they tend to forget. So only genuine no men and no women can tell you why they disagree and what outcome they're trying to protect. The second is the incentive test. Who stays by your side when there's nothing immediate for them to gain? Remove your title, money, power, and access, then ask who still calls you and who still dares to speak the truth. This test is important because many relationships don't become transactional right away. It happens through repeated exchanges in which one person gives access and the other person gives admiration. The third is the bad news latency test. How long does it take for critical information to reach you? When something goes seriously wrong, do you hear about it immediately or after someone has had time to rewrite it into something more comfortable? Then ask, who is deciding on your behalf that you are too angry or too busy to directly hear the truth? If good news moves quickly and bad news moves slowly, your organization is not protecting your time, but they are protecting themselves from your reaction. The fourth is the pre-power relationship test. Who knew you before you held power? This is not a guarantee of loyalty. Old relationships can become resentful or dependent in their own way, but at least they provide a baseline. They remember your actual personality, not your public authority, and that distinction becomes more valuable the longer you remain in power. These 4 tests combined reveal who has survived the transactional tax with their honesty intact, because those are the relationships worth building on. An audit tells you who to trust, but it doesn't tell you how the manipulation operates. And that matters because the most effective flattery is the kind you never notice. Subtle ingratiation creates familiarity even before the person has earned your trust. That person may begin by referencing a shared mutual friend or professional connection, anything that activates the feeling that the two of you belong to the same psychological category. So even before you have evaluated the person's character, you think of them as familiar. Another tactic is conformity presented as independence. The person repeats your opinion but arrives at the same conclusion through slightly different language, so the agreement appears self-generated. For example, they won't say, "I agree with you." Instead, they will let you believe that they arrived at the endpoint on their own. Timing matters too. Praises after a victory feel deserved, but praises delivered during a period of uncertainty can feel like emotional support, which is why it is most effective when your defenses are lowest. None of this means that every shared affiliation is manipulative and every compliment is strategic. Many are not, but you need to slow down the interpretation. Ask yourself what happened before the praise and what the person wants after it. Also, can the person remain honest when agreeing with you no longer benefits them? Ingratiation truly becomes dangerous when you mistake it for character. From there, the transactional tax can bleed from the boardroom into your personal relationships. Once you read every interaction as possible transaction, intimacy becomes difficult. In turn, you even begin questioning genuine gestures. Like a friend may express concern, but you hear an agenda. A family member might ask for help, but you might no longer be able to tell if the request comes from entitlement. Your reputation has an echo, but the solution is not total withdrawal. Withdrawal can protect you from certain motives, but it can also remove the relationships that can keep you grounded. Here's the final verdict of the mirror. Power separates you from truth in stages. First comes flattery, then comes filtration, and then the silence. And the only defense is to keep the line between strategic networking and genuine connections from blurring. The tax does not have to become total isolation. Reward accurate information rather than flattery. Protect constructive disagreement because it is the last honest signal you will receive. And hold on to the relationships that have no reason to please you. The king might sleep with one eye open, but he should not close his other eye to the people who keep him grounded in reality. In my next video, I will cover the infallibility trap, why the most successful leaders stall out. They don't lack vision, but they have built a psychological prison where they're no longer allowed to say, "I don't know." I will see you then.